the glorious saga of the boldest buccaneer the world has ever known, Warner Brothers bring you the flaming story of the Sea Hawk, a galley slave who became the chieftain of the most dangerous band of men ever to fight under the flag of the Skull and Crossbones, riding the danger-swept waters of the Spanish Main, fighting through enemy ambushes in the swamp-infested jungles of Panama and Cartagena, attacking the fighting ships of a great armada with cutlass and saber. Errol Flynn as the Sea Hawk, leading his men to the four corners of the earth, swooping down on the golden cargoes of mighty galleons like a savage bird of prey.
Will the man have a right to know what he's signing up for, Captain?
Not on board this ship, he hasn't. My men follow without questions.
But I believe in you. And whatever you do must be right. Please let me help you.
Over the side, men! Boarders away!
Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the Pirate Round. I be Admiral Skultopus, Her Majesty's representative upon the ocean waves, Admiral of the Ocean Sea. And this is my compatriot here, the Scarlet Raven, we call her. She's actually Lady Underbrush. So, now, before we do anything here on the Pirate Round, what we'd like to do is pour out a drink to our friends. We pour this out of the cursed crystal skull that we found lurking about, and we have a sip here of the Jamaican Mountain Red, and this Jamaican Mountain Red is quite significant because it comes from the New World, like cocoa and tobacco and things like that. So sugar too. So we're going to say a toast to our friends. We wish you were here. We wish you were wherever you want to be, and we wish you weren't dead. And if you are, we miss you. And we hope to see you soon. Yahar!
Cheers.
Excellent.
There, your lordship.
Rah. Now,
Your lordship, what are we here today to talk about?
well, you might wonder why we're dressed like this. And it's because the Scarlet Raven and I are starring in this evening's Shakespearean spectacle, Errol Flynn, the man I wish I had not ever met. Actually, it's not quite true. We're going to talk about a pirate movie this time, aren't we?
That's right. A famous one, an old one, taking us all the way back to 1940.
1940. A long time ago, before many of you were born. Actually, before I was born.
Before even I was born.
Oh, that's
You might not think so, because I am pretty old.
Yeah, well, I mean...
I'm older than time.
Time itself. So, we're going to talk about a movie called The Sea Hawk.
Not a bird.
No.
But it actually is a bird. Well, it's not a bird.
No, it's not. So, this movie is called The Sea Hawk. And it stars Errol Flynn and Claude Raines, and also stars Flora Robison as the Queen, good Queen Bess, Queen Elizabeth of England. God rest her bones. So, the movie concerns the time period of 1585 in England, when England was facing threats from Spain, and they had just brought news from the New World, and that Spain was bringing so much Spanish silver and gold into Europe. They were becoming quite powerful and power mad, and they were spreading throughout the globe, extending their empire. And it seemed that the only thing that could stand in their way was a little rocky island in northern Europe called England.
That's right.
So the movie itself is not really based upon the old story by Raphael Sabatini. That was made into a movie in 1924, and it concerns the English captain who was taken captive by the Moors and condemned to life in a galley as a galley slave, and then who then becomes captain of a Moorish galley and sails around the Mediterranean, causing all sorts of havoc.
Which is actually quite a true story, because there were a few Englishmen who went down to that part of the world and converted to that religion and belief and became corsairs.
That's true. There were some.
Corsairs.
Yep, that's the Corsair episode, which we'll do again later. Now, this sort of movie of the 1940s version is actually a completely constructed script that sort of mirrors the time period, which is 1939-1940 Europe. And if you know your history, you know that England at this time had some issues with a chap named Hitler. And Hitler, of course, was over in Germany and extending his empire all throughout the land, and the only thing that stood in his way was a small rocky island called England, or Great Britain then. And the parallels, of course, are mentioned a few times in the film. But we get ahead of ourselves, so let's talk about the story.
Well, the movie is kind of, in many ways, too, taken about Sir Francis Drake.
True. It's loosely based on...
Very loosely. Very loosely.
Well, it's based on instances that sort of took place at that time period. In the story, Errol Flynn, who plays the captain, Captain Thorpe, attacks a Spanish galley with the intention of taking its prizes and also freeing all the English galley slaves who are aboard the galley. And as he does, he comes across a Spanish ambassador sent to England who is a rather nefarious person who is really more of a spy than he is an ambassador. And of course, he has an English contact who is a double agent in England.
Walsingham in the movie.
Lord Wolfingham.
Wolfingham, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's supposed to be like Walsingham, but it's not. It's Wolfingham.
Right. So, as the story progresses, Errol Flynn, of course, comes across the ambassador's daughter, who, strangely enough, is half English.
And half Spanish.
And she's on her way to attend Queen Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth's court. Now, we have Flora Robison playing Queen Elizabeth, who actually...
It's her second time.
It's the second time she played her, also in A Fire Over England, which another film which has a lot to do with the Spanish Armada and English patriotism and such. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, of all the actresses that played Queen Elizabeth, in her imperiousness and her line delivery in the movie, she does a very good job.
One of the best, I would say.
I would say too. There is a line in there where she is discussing with one of her maids what to do with a man that you're in love with, and she says, of course, you can choose to love a man or you can choose to rule a man. And of course, Queen Elizabeth says, well, I of course choose not to love a man but to rule a man, which of course makes her a monarch. And of course, her imperiousness comes out as she deals with the Spanish ambassador and her rather rambunctious lords of her privy council and that sort.
And trying to prevent war with Spain while still trying to gain wealth.
True. It's a tightrope that English walked at that time between war with Spain and absolute poverty. They needed the silver and gold from the New World, but they also needed peace with Spain. They couldn't afford to go to war with Spain at that time. And so Captain Thorpe comes to England, and he has a plan that he wants to raid the Spanish gold depot in Panama. And of course he assembles his ship, and it takes some convincing to allow for Elizabeth to allow him to do this, and eventually she agrees, because she can't really agree to it as a queen, but she can agree to it as a person of England, and they do need the wealth more than anything.
And you kind of get the feeling she's got a place for this dashing young captain.
Well, she says she likes the rogues, and Thorpe is a rogue.
He's very much a rogue.
So, Lord Whiffingham, of course, is the double agent, tells the Spanish ambassador that what's going to happen, that Thorpe is going to Panama, and the Spanish are waiting for him. And so when he goes to Panama, he is captured by the Spanish and sentenced to a galley. And you get to see lots of scenes of him being slapped and whipped and brutalized, until eventually Thorpe escapes from the galley, returns to England, and starts up his romance again with the ambassador's daughter, and saves England by giving England time to build a fleet and to get ready for the Spanish Armada. Now, of course I'm abbreviating the storyline quite a bit here, but one thing you understand is that at this time, they don't really mention it much in the story, but it has more to do with religion than they would let on. They make the movie more about politics. But remember, Philip, of course, of Spain, King Philip, was Catholic. Queen Elizabeth was Protestant, although they still had a bit of the Catholic in them, but they were essentially Protestant. And this idea that Spain wanted to make the whole world Catholic, and they were fighting in all parts of Europe, trying to push back these rebel upstarts, these heretics, and that sort of thing. And that was a cause of a great deal of animosity between the two countries. Now, Scarlet Raven, am I correct? I'm not sure about this, but I believe that Queen Mary, who was Elizabeth's older sister, had at one time been married to King Philip.
Yes, she had been. And there was kind of this belief that Philip wanted to actually marry Elizabeth. Because, to tame England would have been a great thing for Spain. Mm-hmm. It adds into their whole empire.
True. And they don't mention that in the story, but it's a bit of back history that is kind of fascinating, that not only was there a political angle to this, but Philip probably had his own sort of ideas and his own sort of designs upon Queen Elizabeth also. The movie stars Errol Flynn, who at the time was considered one of the greatest box office draws if not in the United States, in Europe, probably in the world. He was handsome, dashing. He knew how to fence. He
delivered his lines well.
He delivered his lines. He could play almost any sort of character. He fit the role, and of course, he played the dashing Captain Thorpe. And the movie is directed by Michael Curtiz, who had directed Errol Flynn quite often before in Captain Blood, They Died with Their Boots On, and The Charge of the Light Brigade. Now, Michael Curtiz and Errol Flynn did not get along. They fought constantly. However, perhaps it was this sort of tension that made the movie work well and got the best performance out of Flynn, who delivered his lines as best he could, when he was sober, and liked to grandstand and take the center stage. And it's lucky that this film actually has some great character actors who sort of make up the ensemble cast in the back. And we have people like Claude Raines as the Spanish ambassador. We have
his name was Ralph Buchanan, played Uncle Joe in Petticoat Junction.
Oh yeah, actually he's in there as a sailor. There were quite a few uncredited roles from other...
Jay Silverheels, who went on to become Tonto.
Yes, yeah, actually Jay Silverheels is in it too, who became Tonto in The Lone Ranger. And you have quite a few others, and it makes up for the fact that the movie itself could be sort of sparse, filmed on these big sound stages with giant ceilings and hanging tapestries to cover up some of the sets that undoubtedly were probably built for Robin Hood.
Yes,
and a few others.
The amazing thing about these old movies, like Captain Blood and the Seahawk, is the ships they actually built. There were 2 full-size scale ships that they built inside of a studio,
Yes.
and one was 100 and
One was 165 feet long, and the other was 125 feet long. And they built them in a giant tank, and the tank was a controlled environment. The tank was 12 feet deep. And these ships, actually, in the battle scenes, you'll see when the ships attack each other with cannon, and as they crush the oars of the galley,
and the men jump across.
Well, they're actually jumping across over water, and they're attacking the one ship to the other and back and forth. And this allowed them to control what to do with the ship, so they can cause one ship to sink while another ship stays afloat.
Right.
They can have all their stunts, and they could film inside. And it looks like, of course, they're filming on the high seas, but it's in a giant soundstage. Now, of course, all the rest of it was done by giant ship models.
Right, which are absolutely beautiful.
If you see them, I think some of them are like 6 feet long or 7 feet long. They're huge. And they have them moving around their tank. They're radio controlled and firing, lowering sails and firing cannon, and they're absolutely amazing. Of course, the practical effects, they're not digital. So they do look real with lighting and action and mass to them. Although, if you look close, I'm sure you can tell they're models, but you really don't care. The way the storyline goes and the action, and it's actually quite well done in that sense that you actually have a movie that's very enjoyable. It's one of the few films that you research and look at that has almost a 100% rating, as a 100% positive rating from an audience, that they just absolutely loved it.
Right. Now, the movie costs $1.7 million to make, and it made $1.6 million in the United States and another $1 million overseas. So quite a bit of money for that time.
It did, and this is 1940, of course, and to put that much money into making the film, it's a long movie. It's 2 hours long. There's a lot of interesting photography used throughout it. There's lots of use of shadows, which almost predates film noir. There's high contrast profiles. There's high contrast lighting.
Now, at one point in the movie, they actually changed to sepia, which was to designate the warmer temperatures.
Right. When they moved to Panama and they're in the swamp and it's hot and sweltering, they changed the tinting technique to sepia so that you have almost like a glaring orange tone to the film that makes it look as if everything is much hotter. And they did that specifically to change the atmosphere of the film. And it works quite well, I thought. Don't you think?
It works very well.
Yes.
I was when we were watching it, I was wondering, why did they do that? And after we did a little bit of researching, we found that that's why they did it.
True.
It was an effect.
Peasants. Now, one thing about the film that's interesting, of course, is that Errol Flynn did his own stunts, and he did his own swashbuckling. He was a master fencer, and he was quite athletic, leaping around, hanging from the ropes, jumping about here and there, rolling around. He was famous for doing that, and of course, as he was still young at this time, he could do his own stunts. Some of the people he starred with, I believe his name was Edward Daniel, who plays Lord Wolfingham, who was the villain, could not fence at all. So during the fight scenes, actually, when they show him fencing with Errol Flynn, and the camera's always at Wolfingham's back, that is not him at all. That's not Daniel. That's actually a stuntman, because he could not fence, and he could not certainly fence as well as Flynn, and they did not want him to show to be such a horrible fencer. After all, they have to fight in these movies. They have to fight
equal terms.
Exactly, and they have to fight down the stairs, up the stairs,
through the halls,
through the hall, back this way,
around
through the chair, around the chair, over the table, around the pillar,
right,
through the tapestry, through 3 doors, back over the stairs, before they finally go into the throne room, where he finally sticks his sword into the double agent. Only to be saved by Queen Elizabeth as she comes in and, of course, snaps her hands and says, "Enough! Quit it fighting!" And, of course, everyone throws down their swords and immediately kneels before her because she's Queen Bess. And what else would you do?
That's right.
Then, of course, Errol Flynn presents the papers that he has somehow stolen from the Spanish ambassador and says, "My queen, this will all be explained in these papers." yes, of
Oh,
course.
yes, build an armada.
Yes, build an armada. All right. So, cast-wise, I really thought that the film did quite well. Errol Flynn, of course, as Captain Thorpe, his swashbuckling best. Flora Robison as the Queen, who I absolutely love. Alan Hale Sr. as one of the sailors.
Yes, Alan Hale.
Who was actually Alan Hale Jr.'s father, Alan Hale Jr. being the captain from Gilligan's Island. Alan Hale Sr. was one of those actors that was in almost every Errol Flynn movie, one way or another. I think he was in 8 films with Errol Flynn.
Very good actor.
And a character actor par excellence. I mean, he could fit almost any role, as long as it was sort of mildly comedic. He was a great actor with his face, with his voice, with his body. He really puts a lot of modern actors to shame. There was quite a few other cast members in there who actually just fit their roles quite well. The Irish maid of the Spanish ambassador's daughter, who was quite often in roles, and some of the villains, some of the sort of villainy-looking Spaniards with their black mustaches, and they're kind of sweaty and they're kind of whipping people and whoosh, whoosh, go you dogs, you English dogs, keep rowing, that sort of thing. And so acting-wise, I thought it was actually very well done.
It is. It's a very well acted movie. Very fun. I haven't seen this movie in a very, very long time. In fact, I think the last time I saw it, it was cut up into pieces on the television.
There are so many different versions of this film. There's really the 2-hour version, which we saw, and it has the sepia-toned images. Horror upon horrors, someone had taken the film and colorized it. I won't say who, but you might know that this individual's initials are TNT. So, that version, and we had quite a bit cut out of it, is only 1.5 hours long, and they've taken huge chunks out and made it fit for, I guess, late-night TV, of course, or something of the sort. There's another version that is all black and white, and they corrected all the sepia tones, realizing that most people won't understand why the sepia tone was added in, even though, of course, it was added in to make it appear hotter, to make the lighting appear hotter as they were in Panama, which, of course, is much hotter than England. The music by Wolfgang Korngold is absolutely top-notch. Lots of rousing, lots of rousing anthems and drums and hymns and everything quite well, and it's really done very well. Now, let's say something about Errol Flynn. He's been in a lot of movies. Of course, he's not American. He was born in Tasmania. Sometimes people said he was Irish. Some people said he was Australian. He was actually Tasmanian. And he sort of fell into acting because he had other adventures and he'd gotten rather ill. And he made his way to Hollywood and decided to start acting. And, of course, he became very quickly a tremendous box office draw, mainly because of his handsomeness and his athletic ability and his ability to deliver lines.
Now, he wanted to fight in the war, but could not.
He could not. In New Guinea, working as a gold miner, he contracted tuberculosis, and it wrecked his heart. And so whenever he would try to enlist, and of course there's these persistent rumors that he was a Nazi spy, and he was this and that, and a Japanese spy, and he was 4F, and he was some kind of a coward. Flynn had actually several times tried to enlist in all 4 branches of the service, and every time they would stick a stethoscope to his chest, they would hear that irregular heartbeat, and they would know that he was sick, and he was already old, or rather somewhat old, in his late 30s, and they figured, well, he's a risk. If he gets into action, he'll probably have a heart attack. He might put other people at risk. Besides, he's Errol Flynn. Make him make more movies. So he never did get to enlist, but he did make quite a few war films, and he always considered himself to be, an anti-fascist and an anti-Nazi, and so it would have galled him tremendously for him to realize, of course, that people were trying to brand him as a Nazi spy for some reason or another. They also make allusions to perhaps he was bisexual. Well, perhaps he was. It was Hollywood. He was wealthy. He was surrounded by people. He could do what he wants. Who cares?
That's right.
Yeah. There was also a rather seedy side, unfortunately, to Errol Flynn. and that was his drinking, drug use, and the multiple rape charges against him. Which brings up the fact that as actors and actresses, they play a role on stage, folks. And we love them in their characters, we love them on stage, but in real life, unfortunately, as we know, actors and actresses can be quite vile.
Or even regular people.
Or even regular
politicians,
people can be quite vile.
Religious people, or authors, or whatever.
Yeah, it's all about a role. And unfortunately, and fortunately for us, this movie does stand the test of time. It is quite well put together, and the roles that people play in it are very well done.
So I would highly recommend this movie. If you
I
haven't
would
seen
too.
this movie in a long time, I would say watch it. It's a good movie. It's a good swashbuckling movie. It predates our typical golden age of piracy. It's more into the time frame of when piracy was really starting to get big.
The privateer era. I believe they called
right.
it more so the privateer era. And of course, that's why we're dressed like we are. Comorian helmets abound in the film, as do doublets and fancy hats and velvet doublets and feathers and daggers and sorts of things like that. I want to say one more thing. Now, the film was produced 1939 and 1940, and the script underwent many changes toward the end of production, or through production towards the end. And at the end of the film, we have a rather rousing speech by Good Queen Bess, Elizabeth I, where she says, you know, we in England have had a war foisted upon us, and this is not a war of our own choosing, but we shall fight. We shall do everything we can to defeat this enemy, and we shall remain strong and free. And of course, those words are a complete allegory to their struggle at the time with Hitler. And so the film becomes sort of a rousing political stance and a rousing propaganda moment that I'm sure played well in the theaters at the time, hoping to bolster the spirits of the beleaguered English as they faced the Nazis across the Channel. This film supposedly was Winston Churchill's favorite movie, and he watched it quite often. He knew all the people who starred in it, some of the English expatriate actors who acted in Hollywood, and he enjoyed the film quite a bit and watched it often.
The film, as we said, was filmed in 1939-1940 and was released. It was actually re-released, I believe it was in 1946 or 1947, which was quite interesting, to re-release a movie. Well, right after the war. So right before the war, so, you know, you would have had, movies not being able to be able to make the money because, you know, a lot of the people were out fighting, and then after the war, re-releasing it so people could see it all over again.
True, and at that time, Flynn was still somewhat of a star. He hadn't slipped over the edge into the abyss at the time. Of course, soon he would pass away. He died when he was only 50 years old of acute alcoholism, drug addiction, and heart failure. When the coroner cut him open, they said that Flynn had the body of an 85-year-old man, that he had drunk 1 to 2 quarts of alcohol a day, usually vodka.
That's a lot.
He was addicted to opium at the time. He had multiple problems with his legs, his arms, circulation. And sadly enough, he was at the time living with a 15-year-old girl who, in this instance, was rather, of course, it's a very morally reprehensible thing, and at the time caused a great deal of controversy. However, we're here to talk about the movie and not the actors and actresses so much. This is about the film. And so, when you consider what's coming out today in movies, where films are just an endless parade of explosions,
and
violence,
CGI and green screen
and the such, and you have actors and actresses who can barely remember their lines, then you have a movie like this, where everyone's a professional and they do a very good job and they make a product that certainly stands the test of time.
Yes, movies of today really do not add up to what they are or were. Even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They just don't make movies like they used to.
No,
which is unfortunate.
The stories are limited, And instead of a good storyline, quite often producers and directors will substitute sex and violence.
Well, let's make another superhero movie.
Exactly. Or a sequel.
Or another space movie.
Yes. Or with something with explosions and Megan Fox. So, Scarlet Raven, what would you give this film?
Well, you know,
Let's cannon blast rate it like
let's
we do
cannon
on
blast
our...
our, like, yes. So, you know, I have a real fondness for these old movies.
I do too.
And as some of you know, Captain Blood was the movie that first got me into pirates. And while I haven't seen this one very often, I would rate it up there with the Captain Bloods. I would easily give this, as far as a pirate movie goes, I would rate it in the top echelon of probably 4.5.
I would too.
It's a very well done movie, and I think we may be adding it to our collection.
Oh, I would say yes.
Instead of having to rent it off.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you want to watch at least once a year, don't you think?
I would clearly say yes.
Yeah. I rated up there with Captain Blood, and also movies like The Black Swan and The Buccaneer, things like that. Really enjoyable pirate films, action films, history films. I mean, of course, it's not that historically accurate, but you know, there's enough history in it to get you thinking about what happened at the time.
It's a historical fantasy.
True.
Because it is based upon history of our own time. It's just character names have been changed and a little bit of the events have been changed.
Yeah, but it exists within that historical time frame. And movies like that always got me more interested in history and wanted me to... I always felt like I should... crack a book here and go to the library and get a book about the Armada or about the Seahawks. And of course, the Seahawks, are just another name for the English privateers who harassed the Spanish across the Spanish Main and the seas. And so you learn a lot about them. You learn about their tactics and their weapons and their time period, and then you want to learn more about Queen Elizabeth and about King Philip, and it leads you who knows where, all over until you know, after you go through all those books, then you have a Comorian helmet. So, folks, we want to say thank you so much for watching this episode of the Pirate Round. I be Admiral Skultopus, Queen Bess's representative across the ocean seas. This be Lady Underbrush, and otherwise known as the Scarlet Raven. And I say to you now, folks, thank you so much, and we miss you dearly, and we hope you're doing well. Please take care of each other. Remember, you'll be a privateer, and you don't have to let anyone grind you under your boot heel. Stay strong, stay true to yourself. Always be a privateer. Yar har.
Yar har. That's smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing.